I am a mom and an independent researcher in Philadelphia, and I blog at wrenchintheyears.com. I started my activism around public education first, and I was fighting standardized testing and then later educational technology. And eventually I realized after a number of years in that doing that work that what it was really about was global finance aiming to turn everything around us in my city of deep poverty into data for the purposes of digital surveillance and profit. And so at that point, I began to expand my work and my research and really focus in on what I call sort of the global poverty management complex. I organize locally with the Poor People's Economic Human Rights Campaign, and it is an independent anti-poverty group that is led by the poor. It does not take any corporate or foundation money, and we're actually going to be marching on the Democratic National Convention on July 13th this year, 2020, with the intention of asking to take back the 67 cents of every government dollar that is spent on war and occupation. And our intent is that that money be spent here at home to take care of those in need and the poor. So I invite you to come check us out and think about joining us in the streets of Milwaukee. It's going to be a pretty amazing time. My current efforts are focused on raising awareness around pay-for-success finance deals, privatized welfare, blockchain contracts, smart cities, and Internet of Things sensors, data collection through that. And these elements are all combining to create predatory human capital investment markets. And that is all happening within the framework of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So I'm grateful to have been invited to participate in this conference, and I'm anxious to tell you a little bit more about digital identity and Sustainable Development Goal 16, target number 16.9, which is digital identity, and how that connects to global finance and the profiling of families. So in 2015, member states of the United Nations adopted 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And it was an integrated program. It had 169 targets and 235 indicators. And ostensibly, it was meant to achieve peace and prosperity by 2030. And what I'm saying is that before we go too much farther down that road, we really need to ask ourselves whose prosperity and at what cost. People have been led to believe that the purpose of the UN SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, is to address poverty and avert climate catastrophe. And as a mother who lives in a city of deep poverty, as someone who works in a public garden environment, who believes in the healing power of nature, I agree with that. Those are laudable goals. Those are good goals. We have to address wealth inequality, and we need to begin to heal our planet. There's been so much devastation wrought by industrialization. But as a mother who has also been researching innovative finance and emerging technologies and racialized power, I know that there is more to the story that is not being told by the media. And so today, I'm going to outline how powerful interests are using the Sustainable Development Goals to mask their plans to remake the world as a digital panopticon. Essentially what follows is a story of social entrepreneurship. It's not as great as it sounds. Eugenics, social entrepreneurship, greed, and technological authoritarianism. And its foundation is built on our nation's history of racial capitalism, eugenics, and the rise of technocracy. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about technocracy. It was a movement that advances the idea of an industrially engineered society. And in the 1930s, it was based out of Columbia University's Industrial Engineering Department. And it sought to essentially overhaul politics and economics such that technical experts would manage all the systems, and they would prioritize efficiency over everything else. And they would be measuring inputs of energy against outputs, and that this would all be done for the public good. So I believe echoes of this have been woven into smart government initiatives that are now being incubated in think tanks and elite academic institutions across the country. One of the big ones is New York University's GovLab, and it is home to the Research Network on Opening Governance. It's supported by Google and MacArthur Foundation money. And this effort actually hosted 10 international convenings between 2015 and 2017. They weren't all international, but they had an international component. And their goal was to talk about redesigning government practice for the complex policy changes of the 21st century. So the folks at NYU GovLab are convening individuals to talk about remaking our government systems. Not a lot of people are aware of that. So technocracy itself is a system that subverts local control and autonomy and self-determination. It is a movement that has a lot of staying power. So after, this rose up, it was the late 19th century. It came to prominence during the Depression in the 1930s. It subsided in the 50s and 60s. And then in the 70s, Zbigniew Brzezinski brought it back online. So Brzezinski collaborated with David Rockefeller in creating the Trilateral Commission. It's important to note that the Rockefeller family has maintained close ties with the United Nations since its inception. In fact, the ground upon which the New York headquarters was constructed was donated by the Rockefeller family. So the commission was started in 1973, and it remains active today. And it is a powerful invitation-only group of around 350 people. They represent Europe, the United States, and Japan. And they essentially advance a globalist agenda. Its members are drawn from the highest levels of government, industry, academia, and the media. So the Trilateral Commission, again, is looking at a globalist program. Brzezinski in the 70s was bringing this idea of technocracy into those discussions. So current members of the Trilateral Commission in North America, among them Henry Kissinger, Michael Bloomberg, and not surprisingly, Rajiv Shah. He is the current president of the Rockefeller Foundation. The Rockefeller Foundation structured the creation of global social impact investment markets. And this happened in the decade following the housing crash. The foundation coined the term impact investing back in 2008, and it provided seed funding for something called the Global Impact Investment Network, GIIN, as well as a rating system. And these investments were made essentially to create the rules for a new game of global investing. And I would advance that this game that is being played, where poor people are the pawns of this game, is pretty sinister. So 10 years after the Rockefeller Foundation initiated the concept of impact investing at a global scale, it has grown to be a $250 billion market. In 2019, the Rockefeller and MacArthur Foundation got together and they teamed up to form something called the Catalytic Capital Consortium. Each member of the consortium commits to setting aside $30 million for investments that advance the Sustainable Development Goals. So impact investing is very much intertwined with the UN SDGs. So in the late 70s, early 80s, about maybe 7 years after the Trilateral Commission was founded, a former McKinsey consultant by the name of Bill Drayton advanced the idea for emissions trading, carbon credit trading, emissions. This was sort of the first time that this was done. He was working in the Environmental Protection Agency, and it was Jimmy Carter's administration. And at the time, so President Carter was a member of the first cohort of the Trilateral Commission. He was taken under the wing of the Trilateral Commission. A large number of his appointments were also members, and one of his closest policy advisors was Brzezinski, the technocrat. So it goes back to the 70s. What Drayton did as part of the Carter administration in setting up this carbon credit trading program was to normalize the measurement and pricing of desired outcomes. And this is really important, so that he was going to put a price on a desired outcome, and that was commonly understood. In this case, it was the carbon emission, emission reductions. So this type of finance, I believe, is going to play a major role in the years to come. The public was led to believe that once you had this agreed upon sort of cost for these externalities, which in this case was greenhouse gases, that markets could step in and start to provide a solution to the problem, which was pollution. So with impact investing, when this was applied to social issues, it was much more expansive. So we're not just talking about greenhouse gases, we're talking about social problems that you could quantify it, connect it to a number, and put a price on that. And this idea was that there could be profit with purpose if governments would simply enter into agreements that would allow these Ivy League MBA types to structure financial deals around social issues. So now we fast forward. We have a world that is burning and flooding. People are resisting neoliberalism and structural adjustment in the streets all around the world. They are asserting their rights to live in safety and with dignity. And Indigenous people are putting their lives on the line to protect their lands, not only from government-backed corporate raiders, but from supposedly green environmental NGOs that are advocating actually faux solutions that perpetuate violence against Black and Brown people. These are solutions like the New Deal for Nature, which in the name of biodiversity is advancing the concept that we remove people from 30% of the planet. And this is an outrageous theft of land from original inhabitants. And it is environmental colonialism, essentially. So we are finding ourselves on the doorstep of this fourth industrial revolution. We have robots and algorithms that are poised to take over many jobs, not just basic jobs, also white-collar jobs. The finance and technology sectors have converged, and the world economy is really dominated by the FIRE sectors, and that is finance, insurance, and real estate. The laser focus of these sectors is on short-term returns, in no way on long-term benefit, either for the companies or for society as a whole. And it just leaves destruction in its wake, this short-term gain economy. We are seeing the rise of ubiquitous computing, surveillance, and crypto economics. And so we're hearing a lot that capitalism has reached its endpoint, that we have maximized out the Earth's assets, and that things can't possibly go any further, and that there will be an end to this. But in reality, capitalism has jumped into the virtual space, and now we are tracking digital assets on blockchain. So we have this underway. Additionally, philanthropy, credit organizations, and global aid organizations have joined together to advance this idea of a cashless global economy. This is being done through global aid systems. This includes the Gates Foundation. They have created something called the Better Than Cash Alliance to push borderless electronic payments. And those payments would be tied to biometric data. They hope to scale this program through using government payments to individuals, that's their stepping stone towards that global shift around currencies. It is an era of extreme wealth, inequality, austerity, concentrated power, social unrest, militarization, and environmental degradation. And these market solutions that were sort of advanced in the early 1980s, they haven't worked. They haven't worked. Not only have they not fixed the environment or poverty, they've actually made the problems worse. So the rich have a way of turning disaster into gold. Case in point, this winter, the World Economic Forum, they unleashed a manifesto in support of stakeholder capitalism. So it's like benefit corporations to the rescue. Financiers are going to claim that they are doing positive things with their portfolios by configuring asset allocations to align with ESG, which is environmental, social, and governance. And that is where the Sustainable Development Goals come in. It is worth noting that many faith communities have sizable endowments that are very likely aligned to ESG. So moving forward, when we talk about how these human capital markets are preying on the poor, we need to realize that even though investments may be ESG aligned, it doesn't mean that they actually align with values of faith if you are against treating poor people as asset commodities. The sustainability goals are going to open the door to smart city infrastructure. And that's going to come along with facial recognition cameras, the cashless economy that I mentioned, big data analytics, and artificial intelligence that will be used to increasingly mediate public policy. We'll have various elected government officials standing in front, but the algorithms are running things from behind. This AI is going to be used to implement broad level threat assessments. So they're anticipating a lot of unrest with the fourth industrial revolution, and so risk profiling for all sorts of things is going to be more important, very important. It's going to be the threat of not only natural disasters, but also threats posed by individual dissidents and groups of people who may not be in agreement with the way policies are being handled, especially once things come under the control of the technocrats. So with advances in AI, in predictive policing, that is militarized. I think we need to recognize that if there are people who even peacefully are protesting on behalf of people that may be disruptive of global market operations, that there can be swift, very swift and violent and possibly deadly countermeasures enacted. And that all of that is part of this larger system of surveillance and prediction that is going online now. So with Drayton, what started out as a cost offset scheme for carbon essentially has grown into a globalized cybernetic system through which artificial intelligence can operate at the behest of debt finance. And eventually, if there is no intervention, this system could essentially sort of farm millions of people as domestic livestock, as data commodities. And that may seem very outlandish, but we know that there are already systems in place around geofencing for advertising purposes. Increasingly, there could be geofencing tied to social credit scoring purposes, behavioral purposes. And essentially, we are moving into an era where it's not just our phone that is our Internet of Things sensor. People are additionally getting chips put in their hands. It's a very big thing in Sweden, evidently, for convenience, that are linked to payments and other information that are actually embedded in people's bodies. So we have to look at sort of these longer histories around state control, incarceration, and how those will be evolving in the future as the stakes get higher. So the transnational capitalist class envisions a future where they can control vast swaths of the planet using this 5G and Internet of Things sensors. Meanwhile, there's a mad scientist division of TRADOC, the U.S. Army Training and Command Division. They're talking about how to reconfigure the physical environment of our neighborhoods in preparation for a future of megacity urban warfare. So they're anticipating that we will all be being put into these megacity environments. We have the Army Research Lab. They are 2 years into a 10-year project with 6 different universities to develop not just the Internet of Things, but the Internet of Battlefield Things. So it's important when we are understanding the Internet of Things and 5G that we understand them as military technologies, also cybersecurity. Why are we developing human capital data markets? Why are we creating systems for global finance to speculate on people as human capital data? Well, this is arising from reasons of political economy. It's not about partisan politics, even though that's something that pretty much everyone is consumed by at the moment. It is simply how the global economy needs to function. So as we move into the fourth industrial revolution, there's incredibly concentrated wealth. They need a way to keep it moving. And spending is not going to cut it anymore. Poor people, working class people, they don't have that much money. They have a lot of debt. Spending isn't going to make it happen. It's going to get worse as automation comes online and displaces people, as there are more crises, both environmental and social, that have massive migrations of folks. Having stable incomes is going to be hard for a lot of people to attain a stable income. So how are they going to make it work? Well, they need new plumbing. Essentially, they need a new plumbing system. And real estate served that function for a while. We're still seeing the consequences of that as we have homes that are viewed as investment opportunities and sit empty, while many people are being displaced by gentrification and rising housing costs and are on the streets as houses sit empty. Really, a lot of that came to a crash after the housing and the toxic mortgages. And now 10 years later, we need something bigger than real estate. So what is going to be bigger than real estate? And that's going to be people. They needed to be bigger because the wealth has become even more concentrated in the intervening 10 years. So, I guess we have to ask, what do we think? What do we think about this? Are these sustainable development goals, this idea that you can gamble on data dashboards, instead of horse track betting, you can gamble on the data markets, that you have these 69 target goals, and then you have 235 indicators. That's a lot of different things to bet on. And so we have these social problems, and they're at an epic proportion. And at this point, global capital is figuring out we can start to walk those back if we can track progress on these social problems on the dashboards, and we can make the money gambling on the dashboards. And these dashboards are being developed by Microsoft and Salesforce. And it's interesting because finance and technology collaborate. They work together. The financiers, the social impact folks, demand the data, and then the tech delivers the infrastructure for that, so the hardware and the software, and telecom delivers the cloud computing, and they make out like gangbusters on data-driven government, on essentially dispossessing people and sort of taking control of things, and they can run things as data and make a lot of money off of that. So moving forward, we have to understand that life as we know it goes away, and essentially life becomes impact, demonstrated impact, tracking impact. It's like the technocrats tracking the energy credits. And we can thank Mark Zuckerberg, among others, but now the Trilateral Commission folks, they're going to have these Pavlovian tools that they can use to nudge the masses through these digital platforms and tweaks. It is at this point of impact that authoritarianism really starts to tighten its grip. So we have to question who gets to decide what is an impact market? What gets impacted? Who gets impacted? Can you opt out of being impacted? Do you have to be a data commodity if you use public services? Who gets to decide what the metrics are? What if in your community, the thing that you care about can't be turned into a metric? Does it get taken off the table and instead you get a substitute, something that's like a shallow substitute for the success that you really want? And I'm thinking in this case with education, like a third grade test score. A third grade test score is not a meaningful indication of real knowledge. It may be some part of a reflection of education, but it is not truly a reflection of actual education. But that becomes the impact metric, is the third grade test score. How are metrics going to affect how services are delivered? They don't trust people to collect data with fidelity. They don't think people can collect data fast enough. Increasingly, more and more of our interactions with our benefit systems are going to be digitally mediated, not because they're better that way, but because that's how the data gets collected. And who is going to say how the tracking happens? Is it tracking through wearable technology? Is it tracking through cameras? Is it tracking on a phone? How does the tracking and monitoring present? And the data, how is it analyzed? Is it analyzed by a person? Is it analyzed by an algorithm? And what are the payouts? So what is the money attached to all of this impact? And who do we really think is going to come out ahead if we allow global investment markets to be built on disaster and misery? Okay, so if that's the raw material, they want these markets to be profitable. So it seems very likely that if they are profitable, we're going to only end up with more disaster and more misery and more poverty, but it will be better managed. And that's just the sick logic of how this system will work. Investors are going to want to increase their profit, increase the source of their profit. They will not eliminate the source of their profit, so they will not seek to eliminate poverty. And I think that is something we really need to keep in mind as we assess what social entrepreneurship is when you're talking about it in a data-driven pay-for-success program. So we are now at a tipping point. We've had years of austerity. The government really can't keep doing more with less. The need is greater. The assets are less and less. And so they're shifting responsibilities to take care of the people onto into nonprofit providers. And they're making these connections with government contracts that are performance-based. And the private investment community and the foundations that are seeding these markets, they're the ones who are fronting money for the services. So the linchpin, again, that makes all of this work is this idea of outcomes-based contracts. And it was a model that was developed in the mid-1990s by Minneapolis Federal Reserve economist Arthur Rolnick. And he collaborated with a former General Mills executive who he became a nonprofit sort of guru in workforce training. His name was Steve Rothschild. And they came together and they developed sort of model legislation for the state of Minnesota around performance contracts for the government. So it's interesting to note that right around the same time, also in the Twin Cities, charter schools were being developed. So Rolnick and Rothschild also promoted human capital bonds, or HUCAPs, and this is an idea that hasn't gotten off the ground, but I fear the concept is really waiting in the wings. So Rolnick spent the latter half of his career with hedge fund manager Robert Duger and Nobel Prize winning economist Jim Heckman. And they worked on this Invest in Kids agenda. And the idea was that they would transform early childhood services, prenatal care, home visits, early childhood education, and literacy, early literacy, K-3, into a global investment market, but essentially it would be a market built on child and family surveillance. They concocted an equation. It was called the Heckman equation. It guaranteed a 7 to 10% annual rate of return, 13 if you include health benefits, and they sold it. They were selling it to community foundations all around the country. But the thing is, they needed a good impact metric, and they needed something that would work for the markets. And it had to be something that would move. And so they settled on behavioral data because they felt that they could manipulate that more consistently than they could cognitive data, which is IQ. And essentially what they're going to do is manipulate behavior with through video game platforms. And you'll see this a lot around executive function programs that are coming online now. So essentially we're talking about digital brainwashing to benefit global finance within the context of social service provision, which is really sick, but that's where we are. So now we actually have surveillance play tables showing up in Head Start programs, which are Educare programs in Tulsa. And Educare is backed by George Kaiser, who is big oil, big banking in Oklahoma. He is part of a larger consortium that's investing in early childhood called Blue Meridian Partners. The thing about these surveillance play tables is it's like a flat screen TV. They have fisheye cameras on two ends, and they video and audio record toddlers playing together to rate their social behaviors. And they're not doing this because they think it's good for toddlers. They're doing this because the global investment markets, impact investment markets, demand it. So another example, we have Pam. Pam is the wife of Pierre Omidyar of Omidyar Network. He also founded eBay. Omidyar Network is advancing global digital identity systems. And they developed, through this thing called Hope Lab, essentially a behaviorist app for low-income mothers on Medicaid who were pregnant to sort of nudge them. And they would interact with content, and they would give them suggestions, and they would be collecting data about how these pregnant women interacted with the app. They were saying that this app was going to solve poverty by having a nudge at the right time, but clearly that's not going to be how you solve poverty, but it does create the data. A step beyond this, the IXO Foundation and IO2 Foundation, they've gone a step further, and in China and Brazil, they're doing home visits with tablets that take video recordings that record home visits and unlock social impact payments using data collected on video recording of families in their homes. Again, for global impact markets. That's what impact looks like. It's not pretty. And we're doing this to people not because we actually think that these apps and these interventions that we're recording online will solve the problems of wealth inequality. We're doing it so that the people who have all the money can make more money, including Goldman Sachs, among others. So this drumbeat for early childhood investment is getting louder and louder. There are a number of states that have bills focused on it right now. Last week, the Washington Welcome Baby Bill was pushed back again. Last year, there were folks in Minnesota who pushed back on this Great Start for Minnesota Children. What's coming back, I understand. And it's really not easy to explain to an elected official who doesn't know about surveillance play tables, who doesn't know about human capital bonds, who doesn't understand the sort of nefarious intent of these predatory financial deals. What is the matter with something that ostensibly sounds wonderful? Like, why wouldn't you want to, put resources towards children? Well, we want public resources towards children. We don't want to turn them into private investment commodities. And I just want to say I'm really grateful for there are many activist moms and community members out there who have done that work to educate elected officials and turn things around and to tell the true story of what's going on. And I'm really grateful for that. These bills are data grabs. They will be used to profile low-income families through something called like this 2-generation tracking model. And this was refined by the Annie E. Casey Foundation, is being put forward by the Aspen Institute. And the Sustainable Development Goals are connected to this because goal number 3 is health, goal number 4 is education, and there are, of these 230 plus indicators, 35 of them are child specific. This universal rights of the child, embedded within that are these rights, but essentially no one said you have the rights to be an investment commodity, and that's what we need to be talking about. So I'm sharing here an image from the Global Education Futures Forum agenda. It is an international group of very influential academics, and they have this education timeline charting out to 2035. And it's a futurist program, so the things on this map are not all in place, although many of them are falling into place. And one of the things that they have on this map, this timeline, is that the super rich are going to have portfolios of human capital, portfolios of people. And it's kind of shocking to say, but I think we need to lay it out there, is that when we talk about human capital bonds, we're not talking about this in abstract. Like, really, the super rich are trying to figure out how do they turn people into investment commodities, and how are they going to identify undervalued assets, which in many respects you'll hear the idea that the term opportunity youth, and those are people who are being targeted as undervalued assets, not because they want to do the right thing by people who have been marginalized and empower them. It is that they want to manage them as data for these programs. So I will say most likely a lot of this will start through income sharing agreements. This will be tied to college, maybe even this free college that we're hearing about, and workforce training. And branches of the Federal Reserve System have been pumping out white papers on how to turn labor markets and global inclusion, especially for women, financial inclusion, and economic mobility into investment opportunities. So the Fed maintains very close connections to the United Way. The human capital markets are running through the United Way and strive together. The United Way has a program called ALICE, Assets Limited Income Constrained Employed, which is the working poor. So they're looking to manage the working poor through these systems for profit. They also maintain relationships to the Lumina Foundation. Lumina is connected to student debt, and they're also very much a part of the shift away from real education towards the collection of competencies, digital badges, and skills, really engineering people for very specific gig economy types of jobs. So the push behind human capital impact investing is also why we are seeing Swiss model apprenticeship programs in Washington State and Colorado. Those career pathways and blockchain transcripts are really the bookend to the Heckman equation pre-K surveillance play tables. And this workforce-oriented curriculum is being pitched in pre-K, as if pre-K children need to have their career figured out or be thinking about careers when they're 3 years old. Middle schools are using corporate strengths assessment programs, Naviance being one of these, to start charting like 14-year-olds into career pathways. And the thing is, folks who are involved in the future of work, the Davos people, they know the only thing clear about the future of work in the fourth industrial revolution, when people being put out of jobs by algorithms and global platform labor, is that we don't know. So this idea that you would put a child on a career pathway before they've even had a rich education is shortchanging them, and is really just setting themselves up to be early on part of this badge currency program. In this future of people portfolios, a person's worth is going to be measured in competencies and skills. And this will be represented by collections of badges. And so we are already seeing badging of behaviors in schools, behaviors and mindsets. And this is happening through PBIS, Class Dojo, Red Critter, Google's Classcraft. There are innumerable software platforms that are tracking this. Otis. And we're also normalizing gamified economies that are attached to the behavior tracking, that through compliance and good behavior in classrooms, that your behavior can be essentially a sort of a currency. And a lot of these are corporate concepts, leaderboards that are being pushed back into schools and used to rank and sort kids. And none of this is okay, because it's not okay. So building on Rolnick and Rothschild's early work on performance-based contracting, Sir Ronald Cohen took it to the next step. He is a Harvard MBA. He's considered the father of British venture capital. He created what's called a social impact bond. So we have Rolnick with human capital performance bonds, never quite got off the ground. Then Cohen developed social impact bonds. So this was not just about workforce development or pre-K. They were tapping into all sorts of other social programs, and there are really huge markets in social impact bonds in the United Kingdom right now. He tapped into the lottery fund to do that. The first impact bond was with Peterborough Prison, and it was an intervention to reduce the number of people being reincarcerated. So a few years after Peterborough, it jumped across over to the U.S. We had the Rikers Island Social Impact Bond. And we've had about a dozen in our country. Some of them are for pre-K, some of them around housing, but they never really took off because I think essentially they were too complicated. They couldn't scale. So now the markets are shifting to pay for success. Pay for success and performance contracting is being embedded in a lot of legislation at state levels and at the federal level. It was part of the Every Student Succeeds Act. It has the backing of Michael Bloomberg, J.B. Pritzker, Social Innovation Fund that was started by Obama. Cohen has a division of social capital here. Also, George Overholtzer's Third Sector Capital Partners. Overholtzer made a name for himself in Capital One credit cards, and then eventually later the nonprofit finance fund. So Third Sector Capital has been offering technical assistance in many Pay for Success deals in the U.S. And all of this impact data-driven government, it's riding this coattails of e-government solutionism that's being pushed by Cisco and IBM and all of the sort of technocracy folks who really stand to gain by turning government into big data. And it sort of waltzes in on this, we've got the What Works change agents that Bloomberg is bringing in, and these people on special fellowships with Fuse who are like repackaging what's left of civil society essentially as sort of warmed over investment products for global hedge funds. They were just picking up the pieces and trying to, mash something together to keep the machine running. So as Pay for Success starts to be adopted more widely, we're seeing more and more, if you don't know any of this, it would just seem ridiculous, wrong-headed solutions being imposed, things like online preschool, which seem ridiculous unless you understand that the idea is to get data on early childhood stuff to run these global deals. Mouthpieces for the fintech sector like New America, which has this Bretton Woods 2 responsible asset allocator division, they're lining up in support. There's a chorus of, clamoring for what works data-driven government. But we have to realize if you're a person in need of services, if you need food, housing, education, training, addiction treatment, medical treatment, well, you're going to be put on a pathway, some kind of pathway, a prescriptive pathway. It's not going to be your choice. It may not even be your social worker's choice or your teacher's choice or your doctor's choice, but you're going to probably more like the AI's choice, put on a pathway with various points at which you will have to demonstrate compliance, and that's compliance to global markets. These service providers are finding themselves losing their autonomy, being deprofessionalized, and being undermined by this tyranny of big data. And they're less and less accountable to their clients and communities. I mean, they try to be, but ultimately they must answer to the investors that are paying their salaries. And that's what happens when essentially you outsource public good to public-private partnerships. So how does the UN fit in again? Again, we can look to the UN UNSIF, which is Innovative Finance for the Sustainability Development Goals. And this is a collaboration of the UN, and they have partnered with business schools from 9 global universities. And they are tasked with channeling the capital into the SDGs, into the solutions like online pre-K. Where does the capital come from? So we have to look to the Impact Management Project. In 2018, the United Nations Development Program, they set up a partnership with the International Finance Corporation, OECD, GIIN, the World Benchmarking Alliance, the Global Steering Group for Impact Investment, and Social Value International, and they all got together to, again, set the terms of the game, set the metrics, figure out how they were going to measure it, assess it, and capture the impact. Another group that's involved is the IEEE, the Institute for Electronics and Electrical Engineers, and they're in on the game, and their job is to make essentially what they call a people-centered internet, and that is going to turn the masses of folks into harmonized digital citizens of smart cities. And it is going to be their UN SDG-aligned behaviors on which the technocracy's impact markets run. So technocracy needs to have all of these impact indicators, hook us all into the system, and then see who is going along and who is not going along, and that's how the bets happen. The EU is already well underway in this. They are piloting blockchain identity, and they are also setting up single data markets and fair trade data markets across the EU. The Impact Management Project is coordinated with Bridges Fund Management, and that, surprise, surprise, is the firm of Sir Ronald Cohen, so it's a very small world. The Omidyar Network was also part in on the ground floor of setting up the Impact Management Project. And within 18 months of getting started, they already had 2,000 members on board, and these were some of the world's largest asset holders. This is Blackstone, UBS Bank, Deutsche Bank, Bank of America, PricewaterhouseCoopers, UK AID, Ford Foundation, MacArthur, but it goes on and on. I mean, 2,000. And I just want to make clear, I a lot of these indicators are not bad ideas. I think we need to fix the planet. I like riding my bike. I like walkable communities. I don't want people hit by cars. I want moms to have prenatal health care. I want kids to have education. I don't like cash bail. I would like for justice to be applied not just in my community, but worldwide. I would like all of those things, but they shouldn't be investment markets. And I don't think these decisions about these things need to happen within communities and be accountable to communities, and they shouldn't be being run by some Uber manager or AI intelligence avatar in the cloud that reports to Ronald Cohen and the 2,000 people that he's organizing around impact. It shouldn't be that way. So the indicators that are valued by community members, those should be advanced, and they should be funded with public dollars, not private money. Because the data collection that is required to unlock good capital is always going to ultimately poison impact-funded ventures in the end. If it's not accountable to the people and it's accountable to investors, it's never going to be right. And as we make these decisions, I think we also need to prioritize the interests of indigenous communities because they know how to live in right relationship to the land. And if anyone here is thinking that we need to just turn control of society over to the financial sector backed by the military and thinking that they're the proper ones to set the world straight about climate change, you need to revisit your history because it's not. Tech and defense interests have had the creation of global augmented reality overlays onto the world in the works for quite some time. Once that coding hits a tipping point, these green capitalists are going to be able to impose rules using digital geofencing that are going to advantage their financial positions. And in this world that they're building, this world built as a militarized world of cyber defense, in reality that isn't actual reality, everything is going to have a price. Everything is going to be tracked. It's going to have a value. It's going to be subject to predictive analytics and risk profiling because that's what technocracy needs to run. And things that should never be tallied, things like happiness and companionship and the wonders of nature, those are all just going to be put on a balance sheet, sorted by column. Figure out how much it costs and put a pin in it. And I don't want that kind of world. So the trial run for this was Pokemon Go. Niantic, the parent company that developed the game, it was bankrolled by In-Q-Tel, which is the venture capital arm of the CIA. And I would say if the deep state was looking for some sort of signal on this test case, if people were going to embrace augmented reality, that at least at this stage, it seemed like people, it's died down a lot, but people were super excited at the time. And yet communities across the country are starting to wake up and express concerns about elements of this program of augmented reality and Internet of Things. And that is around 5G, the installation of 5G, which is the infrastructure for all of it that underpins all of it. This is being installed in neighborhoods. It is the telecommunications infrastructure that will bring on the fourth industrial revolution online. So the World Economic Forum, Brookings, Nokia, Ericsson, the ITU, which is the United Nations Agency of Information and Communications Technology, they're all saying, we got to have 5G and these cell phones and tablets to make the development goals happen. There must-have goals, and we especially need them for education, health, gender equity, and smart infrastructure for those goals. But the thing is, for 5G to work properly, antennae have to be 1 to 200 meters apart, and that concentrates radiation exposure. So not only are these small cell installations eyesores, and they are really ugly, but they're huge potential concerns about potential negative health consequences related to exposure to electromagnetic fields. So in 2015, scientists petitioned the United Nations to convene a working group around the pros and cons of the technology and to figure out how to come up with alternatives that would lower exposure to ELF, which is extremely low magnetic fields, and RF, which is radio frequency radiation. But no action was ever taken. And so that was in 2015. Again, last year, the petition was resubmitted. It had 250 signatures of scientists working specifically in that field from 43 countries who said, you have to do something. They're putting these not only all over the light poles, but they're putting them on buildings and they're putting them in houses. And again, still no response. And so why has the United Nations remained silent about this public health issue? And it's one that really puts pregnant women and children at risk. And it's because the globalists behind the UN have to have the 5G. They have to have it because without it, they cannot monitor people and nature at the level that is required for their deals. If there isn't 5G, their big plan to profit from performance data falls apart. And so to function at the scale needed to service global markets, the system has to be automated. And they need the 5G for wearable technology and telemedicine and online education and virtual reality therapy and all of these things. And they are not going to defer to manual data entry because it's never going to be fast enough or expansive enough. And the authorities know that they are not going to be able to steer communities to all of the targets of these 17 goals if they actually allow people to have some say over it. They're not going to permit free discussion or consensus over these goals because they don't really want empowered communities. That would undermine their markets because the whole thing is to engineer society towards these targets so that they can take the money off the performance data. And so I guess they think that we're just going to shut up and not talk about it, but we're not going to shut up and we're going to continue to talk about it. So what else? We need to talk about digital identity. That is what is needed to do the human capital part to bring it to scale within these smart environments of 5G and Internet of Things. Essentially so people can be monitored in real time, just like you would monitor the smokestack of some industrial factory. The digital identity is also known as self-sovereign identity. It's embedded in goal number 16, target 16.9. They don't specify digital, but everyone is moving in a digital direction. So there are prototypes being set up now, and it will aggregate information. All of this interoperable data on health, education, training, economic productivity, behavior, housing access, all of these things will cling to your virtual identity. The World Bank has a huge project in human capital. They're also experimenting with social impact bonds and blockchain bonds, doing social impact bonds on blockchain. They are pursuing something called ID4D. The United Nations has partnered with Microsoft and Accenture to develop something called ID 2020. And that is a digital identity system that links refugee benefit access along with biometrics to payment systems. So various states in the United States, we are not quite that far, but they are rolling out digital driver's licenses in coordination with a company called Idemia. And Idemia really touts its services as augmented identity. Again, your driver's license being something that all of your additional interactions with your government can accrue to this online digital credential. So families, the family unit and mothers are going to be a focus of intense scrutiny. And that is because they want to assign a digital identity early in life, and that enables the collection of more data, the aggregation of more data. It creates a more robust baseline, and it will open up more impact opportunities. And like I mentioned earlier, there are those pregnancy tracking apps that actually have behavior modification built into them. There were the home visit apps with the facial recognition. And these pilots are running with support of the United Nations Development Program and UNICEF. And UNICEF has a whole innovation division. They're doing blockchain, AI, virtual reality, wearable tech, drones, all of that, and it's being funded through Disney. So it's these really strange connections between aid systems and U.S. corporate interests and military interests that are coming together and intervening into the family unit, into moms and kids in ways that are really predatory, in my opinion. And I think it's really hard to imagine that these sorts of things would happen in the United States, that, oh, that's over there in China, or though that's that's part of a global aid package, that's not here. But really, we have huge numbers of poor folks. And so everything that's being piloted on blockchain identity and impact investing through global aid channels is going to come back here and be used against the poor in our cities and our neighbors and the people that we care about. The state of Illinois has a blockchain task force already. It is the home of commodities futures trading, so that's no big surprise there. And they issued a report last year, and it had a number of thought experiments about how you could use blockchain to regulate benefit access. And one of those featured a diagram that gave a person digital identity and an e-wallet to hold their benefits. In this case, it was food. It was a snap diagram. And if people made the right choice, which was an apple, they would ding, they would get a little payment back. And if they made the wrong choice, which is the hamburger, they would, they would pay full price. And, it seems maybe reasonable until you realize the goal is ultimately that they would scale back the benefit until it would only last the month if you made all the right choices. But if you're someone who's working multiple jobs, who lives in a food desert, who is housing unstable, you're not going to be able to make the right choices. And you're not going to be able to do that for yourself or for your family, and you're going to go hungry. And there's no one to talk to because it's all automated on blockchain. It's all just being handled through blockchain smart contracts. And that's incredibly evil. So now I would say replace the apple and hamburger with other things. Daycare provider, okay? Imagine once the surveillance play tables are in place, how many family-based daycares are going to be left? It's all going to be shifting towards franchises. Think about it in terms of school curriculum, which would probably be online at this point. People might prefer different curriculum. There's going to be the evidence-based curriculum, which is aligned to Common Core, and that will be the curriculum that is preferenced. Job training programs, again, they're starting to be online. They're doing apprenticeships through virtual reality. Which one is the preferred choice? Medical treatments, telemedicine. And in this case of digital identity, there's always going to be a preferred choice. And who's to say that the quote-unquote evidence-based choice isn't getting a kickback to somebody's connected friends, and that the other choice, the choice that may lead somebody to question the system, well, that's going to be disincentivized or actually just banned outright. And that is what digital authoritarianism looks like. And that's what life for poor people in this pay for success panopticon is going to look like, which is why at last summer in July in Detroit, the national meeting of the NAACP, its members overwhelmingly supported a resolution that opposed linking public benefits to blockchain identity systems for this very reason. So again, just to go over a few other examples, unborn children have been put on blockchain in Tanzania. That was in 2018, and that was to track prenatal and maternal healthcare services. Illinois has piloted a blockchain birth certificate program with the company Evernym, which is based out of Salt Lake. Data is like currency, and it has value because it feeds the risk profiling. And so we know that people want to assign those identifiers very early, even in utero. And they're looking to make predictions about that child. Imagine technocracy, inputs and outputs based on their zip code, based on the parent's education attainment, based on their employment status, based on maybe even their trauma scoring, that will be factored in. And I suspect genomics are ultimately going to be a part of this too. And there's this prototype interoperable database system that already exists. It's called DataZone. It's centered in the San Jose area, and that system actually feeds into other database systems. So this feeds into the Silicon Valley Regional Data Trust that was funded by Mark Zuckerberg, and then that in turn feeds into something even larger called the National Interoperability Collaborative. And then the National Interoperability Collaborative is partnered with a lot of tech interests, but also the National Fusion Centers and the National Council on Juvenile Crime and Delinquency. So we are moving swiftly to this sort of pre-crime social engineering Gattaca scenario. And, I can imagine one day where teachers or healthcare providers or social workers are going to have to start looking at dashboards that are where AI is going to say, well, what is the chance that this baby will be a burden on society? What are the chances that they will be a good worker as we define what a good worker is? That they will be disruptive to the system or not, or compliant to the system. And, someday we could even have a situation where accessing benefits means that you have to demonstrate some expectation of a future economic return in exchange for the benefits that you access as a baby or a preschooler. And that's really messed up. And that it makes me wonder now, like given how really dark this situation is, you look at these sustainability development goals and they're like colorful and they're rainbows and they're really cheerful. And all the logos are really cheerful with all these colors. And it feels like a distraction from the really evil nature of what is happening, what cover is being provided through these goals of this profiling system of human capital and of a financializing nature, that these rainbow colors are just a sugar coating on a poison pill. In this world that is currently dominated by finance and technology, the people who already have power tend to get more power, and the people who already have more wealth tend to get more wealth. And that is the McKinsey, Bain, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Citi, Bank of America. Social entrepreneurship, as much as they like to say it's about taking care of people, it preferences their interests. And it is going to continue to enrich the global north at the expense of the global south. It is going to continue to attempt to separate indigenous communities from their lands and their non-human kin. And it is embracing data-driven solutionism, and that harvest of data requires water and energy, and it draws on rare minerals to make the devices and the batteries that power them. And so, like it or not, as much as they would like to advance profit with purpose, the people, these asset managers pushing these sustainable development goal aligned investments, they are tied to the child miners in Congo. They are tied to the political upheaval, the violence against indigenous people, and human rights violations. And that all must be calculated into the cost of this brutal business that is so-called green capitalism. So when you reduce social problems to data for impact investing, what that ends up looking like is lands being desecrated by LNG pipelines because the markets say that natural gas is deemed better for the environment. It looks like forests destroyed to install solar panels, and monocrop plantations, carbon sinks being lifted up as proper substitutes for complex ecosystems. And under the banner of sustainability, these vulnerable populations are going to be subjected to invasive levels of surveillance. The Internet of Things cook stoves and pill bottle caps and Fitbits and the online pre-K that we talked about and brainwave headbands and housing accessed by retinal scan. And at the end of the day, we're going to have to ask ourselves if these solutions are actually meant to solve the problem, or are they about allowing dashboard managers to juke the stats and keep their bosses and investors happy? What is being set up through the UN SDGs is not a program to save the planet or solve poverty, but rather a massive game of legalized gambling that uses sustainability to suppress dissent. Because if you question the motivations of the elite or the way the issues are portrayed in mass media, you risk being painted a climate denier or a hard-hearted person who does not care for the poor. And evidently, we are supposed to set facts aside and unquestionably join in these calls for imposed states of emergencies because somehow we think big banks and militarized policing finally have a conscience, when in truth, it's just that the financiers have come up with a new way to profit from the problems they created in the first place. So Black and Indigenous communities are on the front lines of this struggle because this machine runs on trauma. And they are the ones who carry the most trauma. And that is a direct consequence of ongoing racism, erasure, and colonization. So make no mistake, this machine is going to be coming after everyone in the end. And so it is the moral thing, it is the right thing to face up to our brutal past, this past linked to the doctrine of discovery and the trafficking of Africans as slaves and forced prison labor. And it is time to own that and then to try to make it right, to start to make it right, and stand in solidarity with oppressed communities at home and abroad. This is a global threat that we're up against. This is transnational global capital, so the response needs to be global as well. We need solidarity because in a cloud computing world, the digital harms inflicted on families in poor neighborhoods, whether they be on the other side of town or halfway across the globe, are very well showing up in the backyards of privileged families within a week. It moves very fast. So in the end, the question we have to ask ourselves is, are we going to look away? Are we going to look away as global financiers put children on blockchain? Put unhoused people on blockchain, put people with problems of addiction on blockchain, put diabetics on blockchain? Or are we going to say that this stops now, that it stops now and we're going to organize across race, across class to do what it takes to make that happen, to end it? So again, there's a lot more information on our blog, wrenchinthegears.com, and thank you for listening.